Amazing. Well, that's cool. So we've just finished up a lesson where, quite often I come in and I don't have particularly amazing music theory at all, and Dave's obviously a genius, and I'll often sit there a little bit perplexed, looking and trying to understand things. And we've been looking at some stuff around. I'll let you do the talking there, Dave. We've been looking at the Pink Floyd song. What's the Pink Floyd song we're looking at?
Breathe.
Breathe, that's right. And you did the little performance for us on YouTube. It's up on YouTube, which is just a little short free solo. I've been looking at that at home and sort of wondering about how you can embellish over the top of the chord progression there, and that's what we've been talking a little bit about today. So maybe you want to just talk us through that a little bit, around what the chord progression is and what are some of the tips around finding your way around a fretboard if you're wanting to get creative.
Yeah, right. I guess we're looking at, mainly we're kind of looking at those first two chords, which it's basically just an E minor with that the kind of ninth in there and an A7. So we're kind of thinking, what is kind of like a overall sound that we could use?
Yeah.
And because it's got that second, it's obviously E minor. Because we've got that and then A7 we've got that C sharp.
It's more of a kind of fundamental tone, right?
Yeah, that's kind of one of the main kind of little changes. So we're thinking, that's sort of a Dorian sound, which is kind of a minor scale, which has got, if you think about I think most people, guitarists, would kind of know like an E pentatonic, minor pentatonic kind of scale.
Yeah.
But if you add two notes into that, you get the Dorian scale. So it's got the 1, the 2, the flat 3, the 4, the 5, that natural 6, flat 7, 1. So that kind of, if you're thinking about kind of like a sort of more like a blanket scale approach, like so you're wanting something that will kind of work over it all.
Yeah.
I mean, the blues scale would, or the kind of the minor pentatonic would do the trick, but then the kind of the brightness of that kind of C sharp. It sort of hints at that kind of A7, which sort of, so there is a sense of kind of change, So
yeah.
I guess from that we started to talk about, how do you sort of outline like a chord progression, and whereas we were thinking, what notes are in common, and sort of how can we kind of signal that change, and so that we're thinking about. Looking at some of the kind of the triads of the chord tones. Yes. So rather than thinking about just thinking if we just run up and down a scale, it's going to sound musical. We're thinking about not all the notes in a scale are created equal. That there's some have more weight than others. So and those notes that have a lot of weight would be the kind of the chord tones. So if we're in E, it'd be like E, G, B, and if we make it a seventh chord, B, G, B, D, and if we're on A, it'd be A, C sharp, E, G, D, D. So sort of thinking about getting used to kind of putting those as kind of the backbones of your solo, and so even just thinking about the triads, so the 1, 3, 5. We were looking at kind of how do we get, because I noticed you were looking at what I did in my previous video, and I was sort of moving up the neck.
That's right.
And so we started to talk about like how you could do that. So for example, there's this idea of kind of chord inversions.
Yes.
So if you think 1, 3, 5.
Being the chord tones.
The chord tones, say in E minor, you've got 1, 3, 5, and then in the first, what we call an inversion, is it's the same notes but kind of rearranged. So rather than 1, 3, 5, then it goes to 3, 5, 1. so that's what we call the first inversion, and then the second inversion is those same notes but rearranged again, which is 5, 1, 3. So all of a sudden we've got, so just on that string. So there's you can also on the there's kind of 4 little groups of 3 strings. So it's worth like practicing these kind of inversions.
Yeah,
on different
learning
ones.
the shapes and learning how the chord tones.
So there's and kind of thinking, oh well, in terms of E minor there, we've got actually those open 3 strings are the lowest one on those strings, and then we've got the second inversion.
D minor shape.
Yeah, so you start to kind of notice these. And they become useful ways of kind of creating sort of movement up the neck.
Yeah, and outlining the chord changes and important parts of the song structure.
Yeah. And so I guess they what often happens is that when people learn guitar is that they kind of get shown a kind of a chord or a shape in a kind of a certain part of the neck. And I remember you just like looking at piano players and going, how can they? It's just an E minor, and yet they're playing all these different chords, and you realise no, it's the same chord, but they're finding different ways of moving it around.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also another lovely thing that happens with inversions is that rather than going from like maybe this kind of more jumping kind of movement, then you can find how these chords sit together. So like there's these, so you get this lovely what you call kind of voice leading going, or so what I'm doing there is going from the E minor and then the next available A major sort of shape.
Yeah. And then playing a leading note in between.
Yeah, well, it's good to start off with just the straight kind of tones, but then there's always kind of a little passing tone if you want to.
And so rather than looking at, say, the pentatonic shapes or the pentatonic boxes, a really good way of looking at things is looking at the chord inversions up the neck and then working with some of the available notes around where your fingers are on there, so you might be able to utilise a flat third or a flat 7, something around those chord tones to make it interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Yeah.
So I guess as I looked at it, I think more and more I sort of think, rather than thinking about like scale first and then chord, I'm thinking more like, oh, well, actually, the chord tones are the ones that really kind of that are what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
And then there's these other lovely color tones in between. So say you were up here, you think, well, where are some of the other I'm basing that around that little chord shape. So I'm thinking, where are the available little tones? Because really, particularly if you're thinking about the pentatonic scale, this 1, 3, 5, there's only 2 other notes to add to it. Or here. Yeah, and so all of a sudden, these kind of like, I guess another approach is that, which I've seen quite a bit, is that kind of caged approach, which is trying to look at these quite big chord shapes that go across the neck. And I guess this is a kind of a more movable, kind of smaller kind of version of kind of finding ways of getting around.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a little bit easier for someone like me who's still kind of learning a lot of those shapes around the neck about actually putting those in place. So it's easier to kind of pick out just 3 notes
Yeah.
and try and work out where an entire hand position and two octaves of a scale kind of go
Totally.
in one place, right?
Totally, and you can. I guess when we're talking about that kind of idea of voice leading, it's much easier to see how like say you got taking those two chords, which notes change. You know, so for even just that going from the E minor signals kind of that we can change to the A or and I guess once you kind of internalize the kind of the sound of that, then you can just be a bit more creative with it's almost like you don't, it's not like it stays as a kind of a theoretical kind of exercise. You're trying to, but you internalize that sound. I'm still kind of totally like outlining those kind of chord tones, but I'm trying to do it in a kind of a rhythmically, that wasn't that great, but like trying to do it in a rhythmically interesting way, like in the phrasing, and try and create an idea. So like it's a very simple idea of two notes and just three notes. Whatever it's really kind of like whether you're kind of writing a tune or you're improvising, what kind of captures people's interest is kind of like is some little kind of motif that you don't let go of, and I think so that's another thing with like when people start to improvise, I think they throw a whole bunch of, like they play up and down a scale, or they have an idea and then another idea and another idea, whereas actually you set up a kind of an expectation that people are kind of listening. How are they going to always repeated it once? What's he going to do the next time? And so for me, that's what I try to do when I'm kind of improvising, is like, how can I tell a story, or that kind of has a kind of a beginning and a middle and an end, and it's kind of when you listen to any kind of great composer or improviser, you start to notice this all the time, repetition and subtly developing an idea, and then maybe at the end kind of subverting that idea a little bit. It's like playing with people's expectations. So
that's awesome. That's a great little kind of mini lesson there, and something that I'm certainly working on at the moment. Thanks so much, David, for coming and having a bit of a chat to us today. And let us know if you've got any questions, if anything specific you want to ask David. You can check him out on Bandcamp and his website, www.davidwardmusician.com.
That's the one.
That's the one. Yeah. And
maybe I could put like a little. Could we share like a little thing about those triads and versions? Because sometimes like. You're like a little sheet, because it's sometimes trying to visualize it when you haven't done this stuff is like
tricky.
Quite tricky.
We do have that great the worksheet, which I think is it's the major and minor triads across all four sets of strings. Yeah, we'll pop up a link to that at the end of the video. Cool. Thanks for coming. See you all soon.